He's the father of 14 children, a Lubavitch Hasidic rabbi, and hosts his own cable TV show. He argues for a return to modesty and moderation between men and women. With us on Portrait, Rabbi Manis Friedman. If a person like you, Rabbi Friedman, is a Lubavitcher Hasid, what does that mean?
A Lubavitcher Hasid. Lubavitch is the name of a village, a town in Russia, where Chabad Hasidus, so the teachings of Chabad Hasidus, was centered for about 102 years. The word itself, Lubavitch, of course, is a Russian word, and it means village of love, something similar to Philadelphia or something. And the philosophy there is basically the study of the inner part of Torah, kind of the soul of Torah, that explains the relationship between the soul and God, between the commandment and God, between the soul and the commandment, and how the three get united into one harmony. And it basically is the inner part of Torah.
And is that the best way to distinguish Hasidism from other organized aspects of Jewish life in America?
Well, that's where it all starts. You see, that's where the differences begin. Because when you study the philosophy of Chabad or Hasidus, your whole attitude towards life, towards Judaism, towards commandments, towards God, it all changes. It all becomes a much, what should I say, a three-dimensional relationship with God.
What does that mean in terms of your daily life?
I'm not sure. Three-dimensional, it sounded good. The mitzvahs become joyful.
And a mitzvah?
A mitzvah means one of the commandments, and there are 613 commandments to be joyful about. But like in any relationship, and I guess this is where the whole notion of relationships, human relationships, comes from. In any relationship, if there's a third dimension to the relationship, then the daily routines, the doings, the activities become joyful. When the relationship is dry or lifeless, then the activities become burdensome.
So everything is joyful because everything has a relationship to God?
Right. And if it's all part of the relationship, then the individual act doesn't stand out as a task or a burden, or you don't count. It all becomes really a unified thing. 613 commandments, a lot of commandments. In fact, 10 commandments is a lot of commandments, if you're counting, if it's a matter of numbers. But if it's, this is my God, and this is what he wants, then who cares how many things he wants?
And what is your attitude towards Jews who don't live their lives in that manner?
Every Jew does, to some degree. Just a matter of degree.
There's a great difference in degree, though.
Well, yeah. But the relationship is there. You can look at married couples, and they're so different in the way that they relate to each other, but they're all couples, they're all married.
But the life of a secular Jew who doesn't observe any mitzvot is so dramatically different from yours, isn't it?
In many ways. But I don't know if there's such a thing as a secular Jew who does no mitzvot. They can't really be that kind of thing. Being Jewish is too serious a thing to ignore. And even if you try, the rest of the world doesn't let you anyway. So nobody completely ignores their Jewishness. And you have a variation from the Jew who refuses to do the mitzvah, for example, because he's angry at God, to the Jew who can't wait to do the mitzvah because he's thrilled with God. But I'm not sure which one is a deeper relationship. So the relationship is there. And the way to express that relationship or pursue the relationship will vary greatly.
And is it your job to get those people who don't recognize the relationship to recognize it?
My job.
Your role within the movement of Lubavitcher Hasidism.
That is what I do, but I think it's everybody's job. In a family, nobody's exempt. And we have that. Jews do have that, I think. The good news is that Jews feel a very strong connection with each other when we can put aside our petty differences. We feel connected if something is happening in Israel, Jews all over the world are worried. And people say, oh, do you have relatives there? That's not the point, right? I mean, it's Jews.
Let's talk for a minute about your book, which recently came out in hardcover, Why Doesn't Anyone Blush Anymore? A book about, I think, a call for the need of modesty in relationships between men and women. Am I correct?
Yeah. Modesty is another word for virtue. It's basically a call for virtue in our relationships, because so many things have been written and said about the, the success of a relationship. The ability that one has in conducting a relationship or being part of a relationship. There are certain talents, there are certain abilities, there are certain successful ways of being in a relationship. And it all sounds rather materialistic. It's a valueless kind of a thing.
In your model?
I'm trying to introduce more a moral concern in relationships, a moral model, and
meaning?
Meaning simply that if you want to be in a relationship, you've got to be good, not talented. You don't need any talents to have a relationship. You don't need to be a great communicator. Great communicators get divorced too, you know. It's not a gimmick, it's not a trick, and it's not a talent. It's simply exercising all the goodness you've got in you, because that's what marriage demands. More than anything else, you've got to be a good person. I mean, just plain good in the moral sense, not in the ability sense.
Moral and good as in respecting your partner's privacy?
That's one of the examples.
Moral and good as in being sexually faithful?
Well, yes, certainly that. I mean, everybody knows that. But faithful in smaller ways too, in the more subtle ways. And it all boils down to, I think, one word, which is a frightening word: selfless. I know that all sorts of alarm bells go off in people's head. Selfless? Oh, you mean codependent? You mean doormat? You mean taken advantage of? You mean abused? No, I don't mean that at all. I mean putting your spouse first. For the last 20 years, I've been teaching at Beis Chana, which is a crash course, a seminar on Judaism for college-age women. That's how it started off. Now it's women of all ages, really. And for 20 years, we've been sitting around discussing Jewish life and what's Jewish life without family. So here I'm talking to people who are coming out of a relationship, going into a relationship, ending a marriage, starting a marriage, thinking about marriage, never wanting to think about marriage again, ever. So all these different reactions and emotions concerning relationships. And in the last 20 years, we're talking from the end of the 60s, people have gone through a lot of different issues. I mean, there was politics, and there was Eastern religions, and there was the me generation, and the dropout generation, and food fads. I mean, all sorts of stuff. But no subject, not philosophy and not politics and not religion, nothing gets the kind of reaction that relationships gets. Whether it's relationships between mothers and daughters, which is always a very painful and intense subject, whether it's marriage or children, it's always a very, very intense discussion. So the book really is the result of those discussions for the last 20 years. Of what's wrong with relationships, what's going on, why are we falling apart, why is our greatest strength becoming our greatest weakness? And if we're concerned for the Jewish community, I would think that responsibly the first concern should be the family, because without that there's nothing.
Do you enjoy all the attention? Do you enjoy being here talking, being on television talking to people, being in the newspapers? I mean, people know your name in this town, in this state.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Do you enjoy it?
Yes, I enjoy talking. It's the only thing I know how to do. And it's my favorite topic. And from what I hear, it means something to people. It's not just talk. It's good talk, it's good subject, good topics. Kind of a break from the other stuff you hear on television talk shows. And the travel is a bit difficult. Being away is difficult.
Tell me how you manage all the travel and all the commitments with a family that includes a wife and 14 children.
When we got married, we were both committed to the idea that we will go somewhere in the Jewish world and commit ourselves to furthering Jewish ideals and Jewish values and so on. So the fact that we can do this on a bigger scale makes it more exciting for both of us. 6 of my children are away in school. Involved.
So only 8 are at home?
Right, yeah, an empty nest syndrome. We're suffering terribly. But what they're doing is they're studying in Lubavitch schools around the world, and in many ways participating as student rabbis in the same kinds of projects that I'm doing. So this is really a family affair.
But do you have time for your children?
Yes. The travel has only been for the last couple of months, and will continue for a few more months, and then finito.
But your children suffer in the meanwhile?
I don't know that they're suffering. They have a wonderful mother. And when I'm home, I'm really home.
What does that mean?
I don't have a 9-to-5 job. So when I'm home, there's a lot of time with the kids, a lot of time at home. And more than that, when the kids know where you are and they like what you're doing, it doesn't in any way diminish the family cohesiveness and the feeling that they have a father. If they didn't know what I was doing, or they didn't like what I was doing, or felt it was not justified, it's not a good reason to be away from home, that would cause problems. It's really the family project. It's not something in addition or besides the family. And that's, I guess, the only way. In the olden days, part of in the book, in the olden days, when a man would leave his house and go off to work a long, hard, difficult day, and sometimes he would have to go out of town by donkey or something to the next village to peddle some wares, and wouldn't be back for a week, 2 weeks. But when he left the house, everybody knew, Daddy is going to bring us some food. He wasn't leaving home. He wasn't going to do something else. He was going to bring some food. And if it took 2 weeks, everybody felt bad for him, not angry at him. And when he would come home with a loaf of bread, this was great success. And this is what a father is about. This is a family with a father, not an absentee father. Because for the man, going to work was not a separate project. It wasn't another part of his life. This was his family. He is the provider, the breadwinner for his family. Well, that changed, obviously, with the technological revolution, and careers became an end in themselves. And so for many, many years now, men have left the house not for the house. They've left the house for their own career. So they've had basically dual loyalties. Their lives are split. They have a family and they have a career. Worst case scenario, the family is getting in the way of the career. He comes home after a hard day at the office. He doesn't want to hear about anything. He's had his day. And he doesn't want to hear about the problems in school. He doesn't want to hear about the kids' sniffles. He doesn't want to hear about the trip that they want to take or whatever. Or at the best, in the best scenario, he's working for his family. Only the job has its own demands. So in spite of himself, he's got dual loyalties.
But you're not that kind of father.
What I'm saying is that nobody should be. I'm saying that in the book, that the fact that women are very unhappy being housewives or mothers is not because mothering has lost its appeal, and not because raising a family has lost its appeal, but because you can't do it alone. And it's amazing that it's lasted this long before women threw up their hands and said, look, this is a one-parent family anyway, so I'm going to work. We need to get back to families, not just women.
Do you oppose women working when they have families?
I oppose men working.
We should all stay home?
We should all live at home. When we go to work, there should be only one purpose, and that's the family. So when we leave the house in the morning, we're not going off to the other part of our lives. There should be only one life. There's got to be a greater harmony. From what I'm reading, it sounds like it is happening. Men are beginning to think more like family members again, and that's good news.
But how would you then describe to me your role within the Lubavitcher movement?
I talk a lot.
To what purpose?
I talk a lot. Celebrating the Hasidic philosophy, increasing the comfort and the joy that we have in being Jewish, increasing the appreciation for all the commandments that help express our Jewishness, and in the bigger picture, increasing the possibility of an eventual true lasting peace by bringing a universal morality to the world, which is one of the most recent projects.
What do you mean, one of the most recent projects?
For many years, it was outreach to Jew, and in the last maybe 10 years, the Rebbe in Brooklyn has been encouraging us to take responsibility for the 7 commandments that all human beings were given at Mount Sinai, and that those 7 commandments, coming from Sinai, being sacred to all people, could be the unifying factor that brings real peace to the world. Because until we put aside our variations in morality, there can't be peace. If we have different ideas of what is right, then there's going to be war. It's only when we agree universally on what is right, and it's a divine right, on divine authority, then we can be confident that there'll be true peace. There'll be no reason for war.
So what does the Rebbe want you to do?
To talk
specifically?
It up. Talk it up. Mention the 7 commandments, the virtue of them, the value, because the world seems to be moving in that direction anyway. So it's like it's presenting an answer after the question has been asked, not trying to impose an answer where there was no question. So the world is looking for it, the world is ready for it, but needs the words, the structure, the details of the commandments.
Maybe this is the time for us to talk about who the Rebbe is and why it is that what he says is so important.
Well, the Rebbe is an 88-year-old rabbi, 89 as of next month, who has been the leader of the Chabad movement for the last 41 years, and has basically reached far beyond Brooklyn, where he hasn't left Brooklyn in 41 years. But he's reached,
true?
Yeah. He hasn't taken a day off in 41 years, which is quite remarkable, I think. I think we did a figure on that once. It's 15,200 and some days consecutively of being at his job. And of course, with the Rebbe, there are no vacations, because when holidays come, he works harder.
What does it mean to be at his job on a day-to-day basis?
He comes into the office every morning, reads a ton of mail. Now he reads faxes, of course. Everything is faxed in, which only increases the number of communications that he has to deal with. He answers them. He reads reports from all the hundreds of branches of office, all over the world, who write in about their financial problems, about their political problems, about their organizational problems,
their
and
personal
moral problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And does all that. So he's running basically about 100 institutions or just in the United States alone. I wouldn't count even what goes on all over the world. And of course, with hundreds of thousands of private lives who turn to him for advice on every kind of a subject, and more often than not, life and death kinds of things.
Why did they turn to him?
For the same reason people used to turn to the prophets, or to the patriarchs, or to the kings. Jews have always had inspired leaders. And the titles have changed. You know, the roles changed slightly. There was a time when the leader was called a king. There was a time when it was called a prophet. There was a time when it was called a patriarch, or more recently a sage. And the most recent is the Rebbe. That's the title of the leader of the generation. And being the inspired leader, he carries responsibility, he shoulders the responsibility for the entire Jewish people and the rest of the world. And that's not something people run to apply for. Nobody wants that job. Nobody can shoulder that kind of a responsibility, and the Rebbe has.
You know, many Jews, American Jews and other Jews in other countries in the world, respond to the role of the Rebbe within the movement as being one of an icon, that he has cult status, that when you walk into a Lubavitch home, there's the picture of the Rebbe in the dining room or in the living room. And some would say, some Jews would say, this is terribly non-Jewish to have this representational figure, this human figure, adored and worshipped in this way. How do you respond to that?
Well, I really don't understand what the discomfort is. Is it not Jewish to adore a righteous person? I mean, is the Torah not full, every page, every chapter, of some great person that we all adore and we teach our children to adore and to worship, if you want to use that word? Who should a child worship? A basketball player? A rock star? On the contrary, the only right way to run a community is to have someone leading the community whom you really trust and really admire and worship, if he deserves that kind of devotion. I think the tragedy is that when we don't have genuine, worthy leaders whom we can worship, we leave that position open for the charlatans and for the idolatrous kinds of things that lead to disaster. So when people say, well, you know, you're giving a person too much power, you know, and power corrupts, and look what happens with these, you know, weird guys, and that's what happens when you don't focus on the right kind of leadership. You leave that position open for the wrong people. So it is certainly Jewish to worship a person who lives up to your ideals and embodies all your ideals. And there has never been a time in Jewish history that we didn't have that kind of a leader. So it's certainly Jewish, and it's also very healthy. It prevents the charlatans from taking over. And leaving that position vacant is very dangerous in any community.
Let me ask you one last question as we bring our conversation to a close. I would like, after our conversation, to be able to shake hands with you and thank you for the time spent together, but yet I can't. Why?
Well,
Why won't you shake my hand?
I'd like to also, but I can't either.
Why?
Because every physical gesture between man and woman is considered intimate, unless it's combat, unless we're fighting. You know. And even then, we're not so sure. It's considered an intimate contact, intimate gesture. And of course, we reserve intimacy for family. So, I mean, in American society, it has lost its intimacy and is not considered an intimate gesture at all. I think that's sad. We can use a little more intimacy in our lives and not less intimacy. So the more things we reserve for the intimate time and part of our lives, the healthier we are. Just one little example for that. I'm not sure it's in the book or not. A woman who is outraged because not only did her husband have an affair, but it was in her bedroom, you know, on her bed.
But you've jumped from a handshake to an affair in the bedroom?
Yeah, let me just try to draw this analogy. Why does it make it worse? I mean, adultery is a pretty bad thing, and infidelity is a pretty bad thing. The fact that it was this bad, I mean, come on. What's the difference? But there is a violation, even in terms of a robe or a bed or a sheet. You used my sheet.
Right, but you're drawing a direct line from the handshake that I'm suggesting to an affair in the bedroom. I'm not inviting you into my bedroom to have an affair. I'm talking about shaking your hand.
So if the bedroom is an intimate thing or an intimate place, which increases the outrage, certainly the handshake, physical contact. I'm saying people are more protective of their bed than of the hug. Is the spouse's hug mine, or does it belong to everybody? Can my wife hug everybody, or is hugging part of our relationship? Is it reserved for us? So if the bed is so sacred that it's reserved for us, shouldn't physical contact, shouldn't a hug, shouldn't a touch be considered ours, not to be shared with anybody else? I think more than a bed, yeah. You can sell the bed. You can get a new one.
Thank you, Rabbi Friedman, for being with us on Portrait.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation or this topic, and you're looking for more information, or you want to hear it again from another angle, there's a way to do that. And that is in this book. It's all there. Order it from Amazon. You can read it, reread it, and share it.